This is Krish Subramanian with reshaped Research. Today we are on Talk Kubernetes show, talking about Kubernetes along the sidelines of KubeCon. I am with Scott Johnston, Chief Product Officer of Docker. Welcome, Scott, to the show, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about Kubernetes and beyond.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Looking forward to it as well.
Yeah. Can you briefly talk about Docker, the company, and talk about what brings you to KubeCon?
Sure. So Docker, the company, I think many of your listeners or many of your viewers probably know, but it's the company that took what was a obscure kind of kernel level, very difficult technology and really democratized it for widespread use by developers, sysadmins, DevOps teams, everywhere in between. Things like C groups and namespaces were all very difficult concepts that were in the Linux kernel and were usable. But how could you bring that to a mass adoption audience? And that's really what Docker did 4.5 years ago with the open source of the Docker engine in 2013. Since then, we built a company around that open source project that has been responsible for taking that open source upstream, providing additional platform capabilities that help enterprises adopt the technology, and then packaging that up as well as putting a go-to-market distribution mechanism around that to make it easier for customers to adopt, deploy, and be successful with the products. So at a very high level, that's what Docker's been on a mission for the last 4.5, 5 years.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with you. When I talk about Docker, I tell them Docker solved the developer experience problem with the containers. Containers has been there for a long time.
They've been there for a while, right?
Docker came and solved the problem.
That's
that
right.
Completely reshaped the entire industry.
That's right.
I was with Red Hat at that time. We had our own container at the time. So when I saw Docker, hey, I thought, okay, this is what we need to look at, and it completely transformed the industry. In fact, I even say Kubernetes exists today because of Docker. Otherwise, probably people wouldn't have thought about using a technology like Kubernetes.
Well, it's a big ecosystem, and to your point, Google was very familiar with containers pre-Docker, right? They're using them in production at scale. And so Google, which is of course the home of Kubernetes, they had very good experience like at scale. What kind of challenges do you have managing lots and lots of containers? And so the kind of notion that Kubernetes is going to be needed, or something like Kubernetes, orchestration, kind of generally speaking, is going to be important for the industry to allow customers to adopt at scale, I think was in the market, if you will. And then I think a whole bunch of us, Docker had its offering in there. There's several other orchestrators as well as Kubernetes kind of in there trying to solve a very similar sort of problem. How do you manage containers at widespread scale?
Yeah, let's sort of like shift a little bit and start with Dockercon Europe. It just happened last week. And
That's right.
I heard it was a successful one. Talk about key takeaways from the conference. What is your feel about Dockercon Europe? And the takeaways?
No, thank you. So it's our 8th Dockercon, and we've had them every year since several times a year since June 2014. It was the very first Dockercon in San Francisco, about 300 in a very small hotel room. And Dockercon Europe was over 2,200 people there live in the conference, over 10,000 online streaming, hundreds of exhibitors, and so it was a wonderful event. And what we're trying to strike is a balance across kind of community and developers and sysadmins and operators as well as commercial. Right, and I think this latest Dockercon was a really nice balance of that, where we had open source projects, some open source right there on stage, on the keynote stage. We had commercial products, both from Docker as well as the commercial ecosystem. And I'll say, if I had to kind of look at trends, one of the big trends is how do you make this broad scale, very, very compelling technology of containers more adoptable by the enterprise. One of our big announcements there was Docker Desktop Enterprise, which was doubling down on our existing kind of developer desktop tool, which has largely been kind of an upstream developer open source development tool platform, making that consumable by the enterprise, making it manageable by enterprise IT desktop operators, as well as putting in productivity tools so that an enterprise developer that's more comfortable, say, in Java Spring Boot or in .NET, can get productive really quickly with containers and not have to become an expert in Docker files or an expert in Docker Compose, that they can stay focused on their core business logic of Java or .NET and use some automation to automatically create the scaffolding of Docker files, Docker Compose, Docker images. And so that was a big announcement. Another big announcement was a very exciting kind of industry announcement around what's called the Cloud Native Application Bundle. And the problem that this spec is solving is up till now kind of moving code that describes multiple applications. A container is simple enough, but when you have multiple containers that describe the application, moving all that from a developer environment to QA to production gets kind of complicated. You've got a lot of files, a lot of definitions that are describing all that. And we have been hearing from our customers for a while, and as had Microsoft and several others. HashiCorp is part of the project, as well as Bitnami. And we realized that there's a better way. There's a better way to kind of help developers and teams move applications from the desktop into production. And that resulted in the Cloud Native Application Bundle spec, which you can think of broadly as a container for containers. So instead of a singleton container, how do you describe multiple containers that constitute an app in an immutable way that makes it easy to move through these different stages of production? And so Docker introduced Docker App, which is an immutable way to just basically implement the CNAB spec. Microsoft announced their implementation of the spec called Duffel up there on stage. And so that was the second big announcement, which of course is good for developers, good for the community, and good for operators and sysadmins as well.
Yeah. So if I remember right, last Dockercon Europe is when Steve Singh took over as CEO of Docker. So culturally, has the company changed in the past year, and what is Steve driving the company towards? Like anything specific in terms of culture, in terms of your customers and stuff like that? If you can talk about it.
Sure. Sure. As maybe your viewers know, Steve's background, he was an entrepreneur himself and started with Concur, 3 people, and over 22 years scaled it to a $1.2 billion revenue and multi-billion-dollar outcome acquisition by SAP. So he's seen startups at multiple scales of growth, right? And what happens at each scale of growth and what you need to put in place. And so I think what Steve has really helped us find is a balance between open source developers, community, and commercial customers, because both are important, right? Both are important in a market that's growing so quickly and changing so quickly as ours. And you have to have a foot in innovation and a foot in working with the community and working with your developers, and you have to have a foot, obviously, with customers and commercial partners, and both kind of feed on each other, and the 1 + 1 is 3 sort of thing. And so I think Steve has been very good at helping us find that balance and helping us refine our go-to-market message and positioning with our commercial products, because it is a very noisy, very busy space. A lot of players, right? And if you hear his tales from Concur, which is an expense report company, when he started, there was something like 18 different expense report companies, and he had to find a way to differentiate and navigate that. And he's bringing that same sort of sensibility and experience to Docker. And so I think over the last year plus that he's been on board, I think hopefully your viewers would agree that they've seen a refinement and a refined focus of our messaging and our go-to-market around commercial opportunities.
Absolutely. And let's now jump to the topic of the day, KubeCon.
Yes, yes.
What brings you to KubeCon, and why are you excited about it?
Sure. So there's lots of us here from Docker at KubeCon. There's actually a lot of the Kubernetes community at Dockercon last week. So look, it's a big market, big community, the container market in general, and Docker and Kubernetes and many, many others are participants in it. And Kubernetes is very exciting for what it's doing on both areas that are overlapping and very kind of aligned with the Docker community, things like networking and storage and core compute and things like orchestration as well. And then there's some new things coming up on Kubernetes that are also super exciting and really kind of cutting edge. Things around service mesh, right? Things around traceability, observability through distributed tracing. Some of the things that are going on around service brokers around the edge, like all of that is very exciting to kind of see the evolution here at KubeCon and the participants. And so one of the big reasons we come is, of course, we're part of the Kubernetes community. We contribute upstream. We vendor Kubernetes straight from master into our own product. So it's important for us to continue to be active and engaged with those maintainers and those contributors. But it's also to see what's coming, much like folks come to Dockercon to see what's coming in the Docker world. And there's obviously a lot of overlap, but it's a big community. And it's also always interested to see kind of what's coming down the pipe from the Kubernetes community. Yeah,
that brings us to the topic I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
That is like Docker evolved from Docker Swarm as the orchestration layer to giving the choice of Docker Swarm as well as Kubernetes. I want to understand, and probably many of the viewers also want to understand, why are you having 2 different orchestration tools out there in the platform? And if there is a valid reason to have both, what kind of adoption patterns do you see with Swarm, with Kubernetes, or between them?
Yeah, no, a lot of good topics in there. So first off, Swarm and Kubernetes started about the same time. In 2014, they both came to market, and they're both solving solving the challenge of how do you manage multiple nodes and multiple containers on multiple nodes at scale. Broadly speaking, they're of course solving them in different ways, right? Kubernetes was coming at it from more of a declarative approach, and Swarm was more imperative. Swarm was more focused on the developer experience, and Kubernetes was more focused on the operator or sysadmin experience. And of course, that's reflective of the roots of the projects, right? So Kubernetes came out of Google and came out of Borg, and very, very deep computing at scale, distributed computing at scale. And Swarm, as you referenced earlier, really came from a developer-centric point of view, which is how does an individual developer deploy multiple containers across multiple nodes, right? And so the philosophies and angles of approach were different. What we've seen in the pickup, first I think one that's kind of notable and where they tend to play well together is we've had Docker Swarm on Windows in production for 2 years now. Right, GA for 2 years. And so what we've seen in our 600 plus customer base is that a lot of the containerized applications on Windows Server, are of course being deployed and managed on Swarm, because right now it's the only GA orchestrator that's out there. There's a lot of exciting things happening in Kubernetes Windows upstream. We're keeping an eye on that. We've been active in that discussion with Microsoft and with the community. But it hasn't hit yet. It hasn't hit GA yet. So that's one big use case is Windows containers at scale.
Next when they pay together.
That's right, that's right. Another one is that if you're going kind of cloud native at scale out of the gate, that plays really well into Kubernetes strengths, right? Because it comes, again, from that Google provenance or that Google background that just kind of thinks in terms of scale of not tens, but hundreds and thousands of nodes and tens of thousands of containers, right? And they've got kind of wonderful technology and controls and configurations that consider that scale. On the flip side, if you're looking at a cluster of a build CI type cluster and you're looking to spin that up quickly and you want to have your developers kind of control that, then that Swarm interface is really easy to use for your developers to get in and manage that cluster, whether it's Linux or Windows, and drive those type of use cases. And so those are kind of roughly the areas that we see it break out. We do have customers that are doing both today. They'll have a more of a developer slash kind of build CI type use case, and they'll deploy on Swarm, Linux and Windows. And honestly, if it's Windows today, then it goes right to Swarm. And then you have customers that are thinking, no, this is an internet app, maybe a consumer app that has massive scale on the node side as well as the container side, and we need some of the configurations that Kubernetes brings to that, that again kind of harkens back to its Google provenance. And that is kind of where the customer will say, okay, for that cluster, that application, we'll choose that stack. For these other clusters, we'll choose the Swarm stack. So does that help kind of shape where it's going?
Like I'm trying to look at it from the point of view of, for stateless applications, Kubernetes is like no-brainer. I'll go with Kubernetes. With stateful applications, Kubernetes is good, but you need to
the storage
do
is,
a lot more
that's right.
to get going.
Storage is still developing.
So does
that's right.
Swarm solve that problem and make it easy for customers?
Yeah. So Docker has had storage since 2014 certainly, and Swarm was very early in kind of incorporating that as part of the project. The two projects come at them very differently, right? So we have storage at the node engine level, whereas Kubernetes kind of builds it at the orchestration level. And so you do see kind of a lot of stateful applications. And certainly one of the pushes commercially has been for us focusing on how can we bring the value of containers to legacy applications? And of course, legacy applications have state, right? And so Swarm has been very good, whether it's a Linux Java app or whether it's a Windows .NET ASP.NET app. Swarm's been very good in those types of applications as well, which again can be very complementary to Kubernetes type deployments.
So another thing, recently I was talking to Docker team. They gave me a briefing, and what struck me was Docker was well positioned to sort of offer this kind of a multi-cloud support with the governance on top of it.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about it? Like, yes, multi-cloud is one of the things that is close to my interest, and so they said we didn't get to talk much about it on the day, but I would love to hear from you where you're going with that.
Yeah, there's two really exciting trends there that again I think your viewers will pick up on, or certainly they're seeing in their markets and their worlds, which is one is that it's very rare the enterprise that just shuts down the data centers overnight and moves everything to the cloud.
Yeah.
Of our 600 plus enterprise customers, 75% are deploying in hybrid models, 75%, right? And that means they're doing both an on-prem deployment as well as a cloud deployment. And that leads to the second one, which is typically it's not a single cloud, but it's multiple clouds. It's always at least two clouds, right? And so in that lens, they want to have a consistent not just governance model for the deployed applications, but they want to have a consistent build tool chain to build the apps for whether it's on-prem or whether it's cloud. They want to have a consistent security model, right, across on-prem, cloud, across multiple clouds. They want to have a consistent operations model when it comes to deploying, whether it's blue-green deployments, rolling deployments, consistent instrumentation, telemetry around monitoring, logging. And so what we're finding is that being able to put Docker Enterprise across multiple clouds as well as on-prem, standing back from an operations and developer standpoint, that's a consistent set of APIs and interfaces and workflows that you can use regardless of wherever you deploy. And so the project, Federated Application Management and Federated Cluster Management, which we announced in June Dockercon earlier this year, really gives that consistency across both the operator point of view at the cluster level as well as the developer point of view at the application level, so that you kind of don't care which cloud you're deploying to, whether it's on-prem or it's in the cloud or across multiple clouds.
So that also pulls in all the telemetry data or the observability data, the modern lingo, like
that.
So and sort of like use a single pane of glass for
single pane of glass, multiple clusters, multiple applications on multiple clusters. So it's certainly kind of the telemetry and the health data of both clusters and apps, as well as the user management. So access controls, RBAC, who's allowed to touch what, where, when, and why, and how. You want to be able to set that once and then federate it out across all your environments, because you don't want your developers to hop to another cloud and all of a sudden get root access on the box, right? So, but ops teams don't want to have to solve for different silos of clouds and different silos of clusters. Yeah. And so Federated Application Management, Federated Cluster Management allows you to set it once and then roll it out.
So one of the things I would love to go pick your brains on, this is about where Docker wants to go forward. AIOps is sort of becoming the hot thing for observability data, and even to some extent governance and all that. So would you be integrating with the existing platforms and picking up just giving the users dashboard, or would you be learning from the data that's coming into your system and you'll be applying your own models? Where do you expect Docker to go?
No, it's a fair question, and look, it's a fast-moving market, right? So you're always having to kind of check and reassess. But what we found is that we are able to deliver the most value the closer you are to the runtime in the application and the image, right? Containerd is upstream project, default container engine and all the Kubernetes distributions. It uses the OCI image format, again, which we're one of the main maintainers of, contributors and maintainers. And so, and what we found over the years is that our ability to understand container runtimes and the images and apply things like consistent security across the supply chain and really interesting things around the engine for storage and networking. Those are areas that we can add a lot of value. There's a wonderful ecosystem at the next ring out that knows kind of the full stack monitoring and full stack logging. And so what we're trying to do is provide open interfaces like we've done with logging and monitoring, storage, networking, to allow the ecosystem to thrive and develop around that. And then provide a certification program so customers know, like, okay, how do I put all these together into a solution that works for me? So we have a certified plugin program for networking plugins, logging plugins, monitoring plugins, authentication, security plugins. And so look for us to continue to innovate kind of close to the runtime, close to the image format and core. And then when it comes to kind of operational tools that help organizations kind of adopt and operationalize the technology, look for us to create open interfaces and partner with the ecosystem to do that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that makes sense, complete sense. So on the same front about product roadmap, I want to talk about some of the abstractions that are coming in for applications running on top of Kubernetes and Knative.
Yeah.
Are you going to embrace Knative and even serverless beyond Knative? So what is especially you're talking about this governance layer for multi-cloud
That's right.
operations. So like that should encompass all these abstractions that are coming up. So how does Docker see these developments, and how will Docker embrace these technologies?
Yeah, so not going to announce roadmap here on the camera, but you have seen us consistently over the years stay close to the market, stay close to customers, and adopt or partner with those technologies that further distributed computing, broadly speaking, right? And so if you look at the serverless technologies today, I want to say every one that I know about is under the covers using Docker to create that serverless runtime, right? And so that makes it very easy for us to partner. In fact, many of these partners were at Dockercon. They were showing off their products that sit on top of the Docker engine or sit on top of the Docker enterprise platform and bring serverless functionality to the customer. I mean, what we're trying to solve for at the end of the day is customer wants to get into distributed computing, but jumping from platform to platform to platform for them is very expensive. And so how do we over time extend the capabilities of our platform to go not just containers but serverless, and then Knative type functions as a service and other ways in which to build containers. Like, we see that as our responsibility to kind of over time extend that functionality, but do so in a standards way so the customer can choose what type of technology, what stack they want to incorporate, much like we've done with networking and storage. Much like if you look at the Containerd architecture, Containerd allows users to swap in and out different OCI compatible runtime engines, right? So we have Run C in the box, but you can swap in gvisor, you can swap in Kata clear containers. Now Amazon Firecracker, AWS Firecracker is a Run C compatible, right? So that's a good lens with which to look like how we'll continue to work with the community and embrace distributed computing primitives that make sense for the customer to use.
So if I understood it right, like you will be working with the community to help them or empower them at the primitive level than really going up the stack and coming up with a platform of your own, or embracing some platform that's
making the primitives open and open source, and then hardening, packaging, certifying, and adding some secret sauce that makes it easier for enterprise to adopt. Kind of ease of use, simplicity is really what enterprises value in terms of making their developers, making their sysadmins productive. And that kind of doesn't take away, and it doesn't discount the value of the primitives, of the computing primitives. In fact, you need the two together, we would argue, in order to make it adoptable by the enterprise.
Okay. That makes sense. So before we sort of wind up, like I want to ask one question. Like if I'm an enterprise CIO who is already using one of the well-known vendors out there, their platform for cloud native, what is the single most reason which you will put in front of me to convince me to sort of move to Docker? Because Docker is at a stage where there are established vendors sort of having some market advantage there. So you need to go from where you are to sort of compete with them or be on par with them.
Sure.
So what is the argument you will put to a CIO or an enterprise IT decision maker saying that, hey, this is why you should take a look at Docker?
Sure. The reason we hear from the customers again and again is choice. And what I mean by that is not just at a technical level, because certainly Docker containers and Compose and the CNAB spec, like those are all portable, right? And that's part of it, that you have portability built into the application description frameworks and the application implementations. But honestly, our business is aligned to choice, right? We are not tied to any particular underlying infrastructure. We're not tied to a particular operating system. We're not tied to a particular hypervisor, our business model, our economics. And so that aligns very closely with what a CIO is looking for, which is, gosh, I want choice of vendors of operating systems. I want choice of clouds. I want choice of container stacks, to your point. And we find that both our business and our technology stack, our product stack, is very aligned with that customer point of view.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, yeah. Awesome.
All right.
I think I got a much better view of where Docker is going now after talking to you than when I came in today. This is great, and I'm looking forward to more announcement coming from Docker in the next year or so. So we'll again get back probably sometime next year and talk about where we are at that point. This is great. Thank you very much, Scott.
Excellent. Look forward to it. Thank you, Krish.
Thank you.